Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second to last critique. If you can hear me okay and you're in here, go ahead and just say hello in the chat box. All right. Sorry, I had to just make sure the stream was coming through. Can you guys hear me just fine? It's hard to believe this is our second to last week, but today we received our last lessons. Next week is our final critique, so if there are those of you who are playing catch up on your work, so just get it as far as you can for next week. Hi, Brenda. And so if you look in your student portal today, you will find your last 3 lessons, one on the shirt, and there's a brief video on using your color study to help you play with your background and experiment on your painting. And then, of course, I finish up my painting with modifying the background and refining some of the edges around the hair and some of the highlights and those tiny details. So that is pretty much what you can expect this week, and then in a few weeks, once my painting is cured, I will upload and release a short video on varnishing. So I'm going to provide that little extra bonus video, but I have to let my painting cure for a few weeks before I do that. So just letting you guys know that's what's coming. So while a few other people kind of trail in, let's go ahead and get started since you're here, Brenda. So I'm going to open up yours. Before we get started on that, just let me know how the color looks. Is it too bright, or does it look pretty good to you? The color, does it feel pretty balanced to how your painting feels in real life? Hi, Penny. It's going to be probably a somewhat small class today since the class is winding down. Okay, good. The color looks correct. So let's go ahead and just jump in. You've made quite a few corrections from the previous week, and it's looking really good. Your colors look good. The nose and the mouth and the eyes, those all look pretty good. So what I'm looking for right now is edges, addition of details, and things you can do to kind of push your painting a little bit further. Okay, so let me start with this corner here of the mouth. Let me, right here. It's mostly an edge quality. Having that line kind of trail off without much shadow around it kind of makes it fall a little bit flat. So what we're going to do is look at how we can add some depth to that. A few subtle changes can really add up, and so what you'll notice is that in her mouth here, it's a hollow, and the corners of the mouth always recede, because we have to remember that this is on like a curve. Let me draw with a lighter color. So this is a kind of a 3-dimensional, rounded form. So as these press in, we get this little hollow shape, and it's on this side too. It's just a little more obscured. So I think what we should do is add a little bit of maybe one of your shadow colors, but you don't want to go real dark because then it feels too harsh. So I always recommend sticking a little bit to a lighter color, but maybe something like what you have in here. And if we take that and we use it to build up a little bit of depth to that line. And it's usually in this corner of the mouth, it's usually a lighter color because, and it's a very warm color typically, because it's a reflected light. There's a lot of light kind of from here reflecting into that tiny shadow. So I'm thinking if we push it maybe a little bit warmer towards the inner corner, a little greener as it moves out, very much like what you have going on down here. And you drag a little bit of it up this edge. And maybe pull in. I think I made it too wide. That looks pretty good. So you can see the difference there, that it adds a little bit more depth to that corner of the mouth. This area is always very tricky in the muzzle. So you can also go in with a color like alizarin or red oxide and glaze the darkest corner, you know, in a few areas. If you want, it's plenty dark over here, but I think maybe adding a little bit more in this inner corner where that mouth starts to turn under. You can see she has that there, this little kind of shadow shape zigzag. So if we kind of add some of that, that's going to add a little more depth to her lip as well. And I wrestled with this area in the mouth in my painting. I ended up going back and forth quite a lot until I feel like I got it close to, you know, her feeling in the mouth. And then I think on the bottom lip, you could probably start to carry in a few lighter pinks on this left side, especially right here where we start to get some lost edges. So you might consider scumbling a little bit and then building up to those highlights that really add a lot of depth to her mouth. I realize you haven't quite gotten this far, so I think this would be really your next step to creating that finish in the portrait. You could probably go just a touch lighter over this top here too. I like the saturation that you have in this right side, so I think just taking a lighter pink, a little bit more opaque pink, and just scumbling over the left side of the mouth, you can see how that creates a nice lost edge right in here. And you can start to build up. There really aren't any highlights on the top lip, but except for right above it in the philtrum. So then you can start to build those up, and that's going to give you a lot of pop in the mouth as well. This corner might have dropped, I'm looking kind of back between the two, the corner might have dropped a little bit low. I'm wondering if we should nudge it up a little bit. It's not a huge difference, but it kind of gives her a little bit more of a smile. And then look for some of those variations. You can kind of see like there's this little kind of shape that's happening in there. So maybe you could go in with a deeper kind of red-brown and build up more of a shadow. You have it dark enough, I think, on this side. I think just maybe a little bit there through this area. And that's going to add the depth that you really achieved in this eye. I was comparing this to what you had last week, and it really made a big difference, adding all that shading across the eye socket here. So I think we'll push the shadow in the mouth very much the same, and then maybe pick one or two spots where you might want to accent the lips. But usually this side has so much reflected light happening that I don't know if you need to go real dark. It definitely doesn't go as dark as what you have on the right side of her mouth. Another lost edge happens right over here. And you can kind of see where I brought this highlight over. The same thing kind of happens over here, but it's not a highlight color, it's more of like a mid-tone. And you have it, but I think it's maybe needs to be a little bit more subtle, softer edged, and maybe a little cooler. What happens in this area on the mouth is sometimes it comes across as pink, and sometimes it's more of like a mid-tone. It kind of just depends on, you know, the lighting, but it's called the I'm forgetting the exact term, but basically there's like this rim that we have around our bottom lip. I talked about it in the anatomy video, so you could go back and revisit that video, but there is like this little rim that kind of happens. So but even though we see it somewhat obvious, I always try to keep it soft because it tends to lend itself to look more convincing that way. And you can kind of see it connect across here, just subtly. So maybe work on losing that edge there as well. And that's going to add a lot more dimension to the lips as well. So that looks really good. Let's look into the nose a little bit. You'll notice that she kind of has this like button kind of round shape here. And this is looking very straight. So I think all that has to do with is finding a good mid-tone to help slowly turn the form right around here. And look at it as kind of a rounded shape. It's straight through the bridge, but it rounds out in this little button shape. You can kind of see this shadow shape kind of connects to this one here. And then we have a little darker shape, but then there's this little kind of mid-tone shape right in here that helps to round out the nose on the tip. And I think if you just added a little bit more of that roundness right through here, you have the pink, so maybe make like a slightly darker version of that color, maybe more neutral too, and use that, and that will help turn that form. Oops. The eyes look really good. I think you're just ready for putting in maybe some of those details like the eyelashes. Skin tones look really nice. One thing to note is in this eye socket, there's kind of these different segments. We have the form kind of around the ball of the eye, right? So we have like that. And then, so you can kind of see that there's like a little bit of a shading here. You have to kind of imagine this is a sphere, the highlight's here, and there's like all this shading kind of moving up the form there. But then we also have this hollow and a plane change from this plane coming up into the nose. And so what happens is we have a little bit of a shadow, then we have a little bit of a highlight, and then we actually have this little mid-tone, and then it continues as a light tone because this is changing planes right through there too. But it's also soft that it's kind of confusing to decipher, especially when the lighting is so gentle. So I do see that you have this shadow form here, and you do have a light form here. But I think what's happening is that maybe you need to go a little bit lower with your pink and purple, like right through here. And then maybe a little bit more of a light kind of connecting in here, but make it more pink rather than this color. That way it separates slightly. So if I take some of this color in here, let me do a quick paint over. and show you what I mean. So we're going to carry this color a little lower. She even has a deeper kind of warm red in this inner corner. Part of that is cast shadows from the lashes. Then it goes into this kind of pinky lavender. And then you do have some of that brighter highlight, but I would say it's a little cooler. Takes on kind of a bluish cast. And then right through here, you have like a peachy, but it's slightly more pink than maybe what you have in your painting, highlight that kind of connects. So I'm thinking just look at how you can maybe push the forms in here too. Like even under here, maybe going a little more violet gray, maybe pushing some of the blue green. And accentuating it just a touch. It can make this area a lot more interesting to have some of those variations of color. And I actually see that you have some of that, but maybe it just needs to be carried out a little bit wider. And it doesn't look like you've gone through and added your highlights yet, so I think that's your logical next step for the face. I don't feel like you need to entirely glaze the face warm like I did in my demonstration, because I feel like you do have a lot of that warm yellow undertone. So what I would suggest instead is just oiling out with a medium. Like you can use a similar medium to one I use, or you can just use like oleo gel or something. But I would suggest that you maybe use just an oiling out and then go back in and add your highlights. And before you go in and add any detail in the, like the eyelashes, maybe go in and just push the crease a little darker in a few select areas. You don't have to have a real strong outline all the way across. And just make sure you use a very warm color. Like I would even use maybe something close to that lip color. And then the shading kind of arches up from that hollow of the lid. And you can see how that builds a nice contrast to the eye. It's plenty dark on this eye. That one looks great. Your rendering of the lights here and in the iris, that looks excellent. Careful about this eyebrow curling down so deep. Remember that the bottom, they should relate on the same tilt that you have for the eyes, so that might need to come up. And all you need to do for that is maybe take a mid-tone and just trim that first part. And you might need to bring that up a little bit. You have a nice shadow color here. That looks good. And it does come up and meet the brow, but notice there's like this little hollow dip. And it has a very slow transition to the shadow, so it does have a lot of mid-tone. But she has that little deep shadow that kind of comes underneath the brow, and it helps you kind of separate it from the rest. This could also be getting maybe a little narrow. Look at where her eyebrow lines up. It lines up with the tear duct, so make sure you're not getting too narrow there. Okay. Let's see. Something about the mouth still throws me off. I feel like it's kind of favoring the left. It's subtle though, so I need to check a few things. I'm thinking it might be that we need to just take that and just nudge it over. I wish it was that easy in real life. Yeah, that looks a little better. So you might find yourself just shortening it a touch. And what I'll do when I send you your critique is I'll send you this too, so you can kind of see the difference here. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Take a picture or you're looking at it in another format. Actually, one thing I like to do when I'm working is sometimes I'll take a photo of my painting kind of from a distance with my phone. I'll just snap a picture and I'll throw it in reverse, like I'll flip the image, or I'll just look at it smaller. And sometimes it's kind of like stepping back way, way away from your painting. It gives you a big impression of what your painting looks like from a distance, and you can sometimes see those things a little bit more. If it helps you, what I can do is draw a straight line where the corner of the mouth should be. And just note that the little shadow kind of comes out past it, but this is where like the deepest corner of the mouth kind of ends. And you can see it lines up with your pupil. And let's see where yours is. So that's how far yours goes over. So I'll send you this as well, just with the line. That way you can see, you know, where it sits. I think that'll help. And I'll send it with the layover as well. And I think after that, you're just going to keep moving forward with the hair, maybe the details. If it depends on how much time you have to work in the coming week before the final critique. If you have to choose an area because you're kind of limited on time, concentrate on the face because that's obviously the hardest part. The hair and the other stuff is like kind of like icing on the cake. So, and just I mentioned this to the morning critique group, but even though our critiques formally end next week, if you guys are struggling, you know, you're still working through the course kind of at your own pace, you can reach out to me through the forum because you guys will have continued access through the forum. So you can reach out to me, post an in progress, get my feedback, written feedback, even though our live critiques have ended. So Brenda, if you do have time, you can start on the hair and work on the neck. The reflected light under the chin, I think it just needs to be kind of smoothed out a little bit. Maybe if you take the color that you have there and just blend it up a little bit higher, because under there's a core shadow in here, and underneath is a little bit lighter. But you can see how the difference between the two is very, very, very soft. So I think maybe yours just had a little too much contrast. So if you just lightly scumble that reflected light up just through the chin area, that will help enhance the feeling of that reflected light. Let's see, what else? Yeah, your edges look pretty good. You could maybe continue working on the transition in this area. It's kind of tricky, but I think if you took maybe some of this green color that you have, this greenish gray, and you just built up a little bit more right through here, just to round that chin a little slower, your shadow for the chin might not feel so harsh as well, because then it will kind of be turning a little bit slower from that shadow point. Maybe also in here you could do like a semi-opaque scumble over this to help smooth it out. I would make like an opaque gray and just lightly scumble it over the surface. Just for the areas that feel like they got maybe too dark. You can see that she has like a dark accent right here, and then it gets light right through this section, but not real light. It's just, there's almost like a break in the uniformity of that dark. You might also find yourself wanting to deepen this a little bit more, just because you'll be darkening up in here in the mouth just a touch. I think a little accent dark underneath the bottom lip will help as well. And you can even achieve those darker accents with a glaze, and then it won't look choppy, or you won't have to feel like you have to repaint all the edges around it too. Okay. Yeah, and then I think, you know, details in the eyes, go in and add your eyelashes. As this corner of the eyelid kind of rounds towards the hair or this cast shadow, I would push it just a tiny bit darker. Not real dark, but just a little bit. It won't pull the eye so much. And then when you go in and you put in your eyelashes, across the top here, it'll kind of read naturally. This isn't the best brush for doing the eyelashes in this program, but that gives you kind of an idea. So I would say go ahead and put some of those eyelashes in as well, and some of those finishing touches for the eyes. You're very welcome. Do you have any other areas you'd like me to address? Or with the hair too, you might find yourself just needing to go in and build up the lights. I would start there before going darker. So start by just adding those lighter kind of gray and copper tones. Notice that she has more ochre in her coloring of her hair. So as you kind of continue developing those areas, you might introduce a little more of that. She even has some kind of grayish tones that help to neutralize the hair towards the highlights. So that'll make her hair feel more brown, more brunette. Okay. Alrighty, I'm going to go ahead and move forward, but if you have any other questions, just let me know. Nice work. Okay, Randy, are you here? I just wanted to say, all of you guys are doing really good with the critiques. You know, the differences I see in between, you know, each week. I know it's probably hard for you to see it because you guys are working gradually on your painting and you've been staring at them for a long time. But I just wanted to show you an example of, you know, the difference that can happen just week to week. So for example, here was Randy's painting last week, and if you look at the mouth area and the difference that it made in the likeness of the portrait from this week, this is his submission this week, from the previous week, big difference. So these kind of things can, you know, add up even if you don't see it because you're working on your painting and you're the one staring at it. It really does make a difference, these little tweaks that we do each week. Okay, so Randy, if you're in here, say hello, but if not, if you're catching this at a later time, I just want to say this looks really good. You do have a nice likeness of the model. And for the final critique, I would love if you would send me a close-up, just so that I could see the face in a little bit more detail, because I can give you a little bit better feedback on it. So just like maybe something like that. And then of course one that's all the way backed out, and that goes for everyone. So next week send me a close-up, but also send me an overall shot in addition. That way I can give you feedback on how to bring your painting further if you aren't finished next week. We can talk about background and all of that, or detailing the hair, for example. So Randy, I'm thinking, I can't quite tell just because the picture starts to break down a little bit when I zoom in so much, but I'm thinking maybe you can start to look at areas where you can push your value or your details, start to introduce a few more. So I'm thinking like here in the nose, for example, going in and starting to find the nostril and separate out the wing of the nose, the wing of the nostril here. Just by going a little darker, I wouldn't go lighter in that shadow for reflected lights. I would go a little darker where you see it darker, and you need to define some of those edges. So you can start to do some of that. The shadow in the nose feels a little bit purple. And while she does have that in the transitions, you might consider going in with a slightly warmer tone. Maybe that's too dark. Let me find something a little lighter. So maybe something like that, that still feels like a reflected light color, but that it has a little bit more warmth to it. Because she's under a cool light, we don't want our shadows to be cool. We want them to be warm. So that way the lights can feel cool by comparison. So just a little bit more of a punch to that shadow and a little more detail in that shadow is going to go a long way. And the same thing in the mouth. Look for where you can start to push some of those deep accents like the red and really go a little more intense with the chroma. Where you place the mouth, it looks great. I think you can just start to push the dark value to get a little more pop, and the same goes in the eyes. Don't be afraid to really start to push the pupils dark and get a little more dark for that lash line, especially from this angle. That lash line really starts to define that underplane. So you can start to indicate, and even if you don't want to paint individual lashes and you like a more impressionistic kind of style, you still want to have a little bit of the shading that suggests the lashes. And you can see how just pushing that pupil a little darker and starting to add some of those accents is going to start to bring a finish to your portrait here. I think your shadows are plenty dark here. They just look a little sunk in or maybe opaque. I can't quite tell. That's something to consider for those of you who are having issues with sinking in. When you submit your final painting, if you can, if the painting is dry, before you take your picture, try lightly oiling out the entire painting. If your painting isn't dry, that's okay. Just leave it as it is and just let me know if those areas are sunk in. But I don't want to be telling you to change a color if it's just that it's dried a little bit more matte. And you'll see when I do the varnishing video how much all those colors come back true once you varnish. So I'm not going to go much more into the face because I feel like it's pretty much there, other than just going in with your detail layer for the lashes, some of these little cast shadows. You might start to develop the hair a little bit further, start to indicate, look at how there's like these darker browns, red browns right in here that transition into the shadows in kind of a broad stroke. I'm going just a little darker. Your painting might feel this dark in person, but and then the little strands in the lighter tone, kind of that ochre gold tone, can kind of pull in. But try to look at some of the grouping and then get that nice subtle gradient. I think your hair color looks a little on the cool side, so make sure you have some of those red undertones. You can see it definitely in here. She has more of a red-brown. And then she has those kind of golden tones that sit on top where the highlights kind of shimmer. So I think just bringing a little more resolve to the hair and work on some of those edges in the hair. And that'll bring the portrait a long ways. Also, her shirt looks a little bright in color. I would maybe tone it down. You could try just even glazing a little bit of like blue with a little red oxide in it over the shirt, just to knock it down a little bit, especially towards the bottom here. Where it reaches the bottom edge of your canvas, you might consider doing just a very subtle gradient. That way it doesn't pull the eye down too much. And it depends on what you decide to do with the background. You can leave it this color, but maybe look at where you could push the value of it a little darker. So if I take that color that you have and just go in and maybe make it more interesting by creating a gradient. I usually like to do a little bit darker on the light side of the face, gradating over to something just slightly lighter than the silhouette color of the hair. So just maybe consider playing with that idea. Just find maybe a dynamic gradient that you want that can help to enhance and direct the eye around the portrait. I like to look at Rembrandt for these because he does a lot of just simple head studies, but the way he utilized the background to direct the sense of light was really masterful. So if you want to get some creative ideas for doing a simple kind of gradient background, look at some of the Dutch masters. All right, really nice work. If you have any questions, Randy, just let me know. All right, Penny, you are up. And I kind of took a snapshot of your questions because I wanted to make sure I addressed them during our critique today. So I'm just going to read over it really quick. So you said you worked through the highlighting and details on the face. You're not satisfied with the skin kind of blending edges. The highlights are slightly different in this pose. Let me take a look at those. And when you're on the hair, okay, we'll get to the hair. So let's talk about the face, the skin tones, and kind of the transitions. Before we do that though, Penny, let me know if the color looks accurate to how the painting feels in real life to you. For me, it looks a little saturated. But I can't tell if that's, I feel like it's maybe more like this in person, but you let me know. It's a little warm, saturated, so maybe I can cool it off too. Take away some of the red, yellow. How's that? Does that look pretty good? Or is that too cool? I can see what you mean by some of the transitions. For example, let me get an ink pen here. The transition here to here is a little abrupt. Same thing for some of the highlights, but I'll show you how you can go through and smooth out some of those. I know there's a little variation in the monitors, so we'll just kind of go from here. To me, on my screen, this looks very similar to the colors in the photograph, so I think that's probably, I'm going to just assume that's really close to what you have in person. So when you're dealing with some of the transitions, sometimes all it takes is oiling out and kind of scumbling a little bit of the two colors together. So for example, to resolve like this line here, the reason it appears is because you have a darker pink and then this green is lighter. So there's two ways you can resolve this. You can go in with a slightly darker version of this color, or we can take a little bit of this pink and scumble it over into the green slightly. Both methods can work, so let me just show you what, and sometimes I'll end up in my own work doing a little bit of both. So if I take a little bit of that pink and I start to carry it very thinly, and I'm talking about, you know, applying it, you know, you've oiled out and maybe blotted it a little bit, and then you're just taking a small amount of that pink and carrying it over into the green so that that green is still coming through. You can see that that does help. Another thing that can work too is taking that green color but going a little bit darker with it so that it's a little bit of a darker value than the pink, and then it transitions nicely because of the values are more similar. You might find yourself needing to do a little bit of both. The transition in here is a little harsh. So what I would do is take, it kind of depends on if you feel like you need to go lighter or darker, but I think if you took kind of a nice peachy average skin tone and you just lightly scumbled over this area, so basically taking the color from up here and just carrying it down slightly. With the scumbles, you should be able to smooth that out a little bit. Oftentimes when we have those really harsh transitions, it's because you're jumping values too quickly. So you might find yourself having to go back and revisit the light mask next to it and kind of adjust from there as well. Another area, let's see. I mean, you do have areas in this angle where you have like a sharp highlight. An example would be right here in the cheek. Let me just grab a pen again. So like you have this little highlight shape and it's hitting right next to a darker pink. Of course, you always have an abrupt shape difference in shadow. There's this little spot. But I think, you know, overall we could smooth out a few of those areas, and then it might not feel so splotchy to you. So, for example, leaving the harder line between this colored part of the cheek and that light, but maybe down here, maybe going in with a lighter version of this pink and just lightly scumbling over. And when you do a thin scumble, it's kind of like a glaze, but you're using an opaque. What can happen is the underpainting, the colors underneath, are showing through and influencing those upper layers, especially if you're using a lead white. You'd have a harder time doing that if you had to use like a titanium white. And then that starts, I'm going to just use an eraser here. that starts to disappear as it comes down into this range. I think down here you have what you have is good. Her line mark for the smile line is just really short and it's kind of up high, and I think you have a longer line kind of connecting down this way. So what I would do is take maybe some of the muzzle color and just bring it up over that. Scumble very lightly over that. And you can accent this, but just make sure you keep it kind of short, and you don't need to go real dark. She even has a break in the tone, like right through here, kind of gets a little lighter between the two. So let's take a look at that difference there. Can you see that? So I think that will help. What other transitions? Let's see, let's take a look here. Maybe this shape here is a little bit harsh. It has maybe a softer transition. So I think the same thing, if you take a subtle peachy tone, maybe not as bright as what you used over in the left side, but maybe carried up a little bit of light into this, not all the way up to that arc in the bridge. But that should make it feel a little less harsh as well and smooth out that area. This area is real tricky on her, this angle, and I'm thinking maybe if you took the skin tone that you have here and the one you have here and mix them together and find something in the middle, you could go in to a pretty tight spot here and just add a little bit of a darker midtone. That way it turns that bridge of the nose a little bit softer. And that's often what I'll do if I have two edges coming together that are kind of, I feel that are shifting too abruptly. I'll take the two colors that are kind of clashing and I'll mix them together. And that's another kind of shortcut way to help you build that transition a little bit more softly. This is all looking really nice though. I think the next area I would say is to work on some of your edges in the lips here. You'll notice that she has a slightly softer edge on this part of the vermilion of the lip. So I would take maybe this lip color and just make it a touch lighter and just tile a very small amount above it. And you can see how that instantly kind of softened that effect. And then look for where she has lost edges in the lip, which is right in through here. You don't see a real hard line. So I think you could start to work on carrying maybe even a lighter pink in here. And even when you go in with your highlight colors, just make sure that you're blending the edge out a little bit in the beginning and that you don't have a real razor sharp edge. Even if it means going in and tiling another tone somewhere between. And then going in and reapplying your highlight. where this lip curls down to that shadow, you have a nice red there. Maybe just glaze another touch right next to that dark shadow so it feels like it has a little more glow to it before it turns dark, and that will also soften that transition. And you could probably start to go a little darker on this side and a little cooler as that form rounds over. She has a little light trickling over, but it kind of stops at a certain point. And then there's another lost edge right here. It's almost where the skin tone starts to carry into the lip and break up that edge. Our tendency is always to want to really outline the lips and have kind of treat them with like a hard defined edge, but there really should only be a few sharp edges in the lips. Even above here, her highlights are a little bit softer across this arc. So you could probably just take that same kind of technique of tiling a faint pink just in between before that highlight hits, and that softens its effect as well. So you can see that difference there. I'm a little concerned that this eye is getting a little small, but I don't think it's about the inside of the eye, but I think maybe where we see the lash line. So I think when you go in, make sure you bring it out like this, and that this underplane here is maybe a dark red. Maybe even darker than that, because it goes quite dark over here. I think this is kind of glare. I'm pretty sure that's what that is. But let me know if your painting is kind of greenish there instead of warm brown. You might find yourself needing to kind of build up a little more dark contrast and push that pupil to the left just a little bit. To give her a little more white of the eye. It could also be that this lid is pushing up too soon. Let's try nudging that. I think we played with this last week too. And I think what would help too is see how when I select that area, it's more of a lavender pink. It's a little darker. And it only stands out because she has a darker value on the other side of it. I'm wondering if that would help. Just to open up that eye a little bit. And then what might end up needing to happen is that this crease here extends over a little further before it curves down. And disappears on the other side. And that will help to give a impression that the eye is wider. Yeah, the under lid should be a little bit darker red. This eye is in shadow, and the only reason we see the iris here is because there's a little bit of light coming in on this side of it. And if you look, then there's this red. I'll paint over so it's a little more obvious. But there's that, and then there's the dark lashes on the other side of it, and then there's this crease above it. So we want to repeat those shapes similar to that. Now I think you have probably a pretty close color, though I would personally probably push this maybe a little bit deeper just to stay consistent. Yeah, it should be darker red in here too. In this inner corner, you can see the tear duct is quite a dark red. So maybe go in here and accent that as well. Oops. So you can see how that already helped to open up the other eye and make it feel just as big as the one on the left. Your colors in this one seem pretty good, although this probably could go a little more saturated. It's not that you're going maybe too light there, but maybe you just need to go a little bit more red. And then as it turns this way, it gets darker, because the light's reflecting up into that under rim. So those are the kind of the painted areas that you can see. I feel like the transitions on this side are looking pretty good. They do tend to jump more on her face. So I think just focus on those on the left side, on the light side, and work on kind of smoothing those out. And then go into the hair and start to introduce some of those warmer halftones. Her hair kind of, it's much darker towards the top. Go with more of like a burnt sienna mixture as a secondary color. And then her highlights start to cool off a little bit before they go back into kind of a deeper kind of chestnut red brown. Maybe yours are getting too green. I can't tell if that's just the glare from the paint drying or anything, but try to look at some of those colors too. That contrast is going to help her portrait stand out as well. You might find yourself wanting to enhance some of the reflected light under the jawline here and a little bit in the throat. And those are pretty much my suggestions for this week. Do you have any questions, Penny? So what I'll do is I'll send you the paint over, but I'll also send you this so you can just see the areas I've touched up. Because I realize when we're refining on this kind of level, it's kind of hard to see what work I've done. That hair mask on her shirt. Let's see, did you? Oh yeah, you sent me an overall. So let me take these away here. So here's your overall picture. Okay, so I think you definitely want to add a little bit more dimension to her shirt, and I would say go a little darker and more blue, and maybe even just think of it in more like a deep, more neutral blue. Maybe your green is too saturated. So if you just went, you could even try like starting off by glazing a little bit of ultramarine blue mixed with like a red oxide, that can make a really nice kind of muted blue that would glaze this a little bit darker. And then you would want to go in and start to just look for where the side planes maybe get a little darker. If it's getting too close to the edge of your canvas, you might consider just letting the shirt kind of fade off towards the bottom into a darker value, and just keep it kind of in a softer shape overall. And then once you've painted the shirt, you'll want to go in and start to pull some of the hair masses down. And notice that they get a little bit darker towards the end. So I would start off laying in those in the slightly darker ochre tones, and then build up your lights on top of that. And I do have a video on detailing the little edges in the hair too. That's part of your video for this week. I do it after I paint the background though, because you'll want to go in while the background is either oiled out or while you're finishing the background, and work on the edges around the hair where it meets the background. And that's one thing that'll help, is taking this into a darker value range. And I can't tell if it's just that your painting's sunk in here, or if you do need to push a little darker. But try to think in large mass tones in the beginning, and don't worry about the little strands and details. Even sometimes working with a larger brush in the beginning can kind of keep us from getting into those too early. Like you see me doing here, I'm working with a large brush. And then you can go in with those brighter highlights on top of that. You can see how that all draws the attention up to her face a little bit more. You can do some of the ridges, or you can, like I did in my painting, or you can just suggest some of the more subtle forms. That's up to you what you want to do. Don't forget, she does have a little bit of a cast shadow from her hair, and sometimes it helps to just put a little bit of a darker blue underneath where you think the hair is going to come on front, because it will create a slight shadowing underneath, and it'll help it feel like the hair is sitting on top, especially when you bring in oops, I don't know where that came from. Especially when you bring in some of those lighter kind of golden highlights, which are a little darker on her than they are in in this angle than they are in mine. But you can bring those little strands, you know, down. And go in a little darker on that far side of the head. And whenever you have a really thin amount of hair, remember to do, you know, a couple of little wisps. You'll see me do this in the videos from this week, the final videos. You know, you'll end up kind of, not that obvious, but you'll kind of end up breaking up some of the edges here. Even down in here, you might bring a few strands, you know, down to break up some of the kind of similarity. Did that help answer your question? So I would just work on pushing that down And it depends on how dark your background is here too. I think a lot of this is just glare in the photo, but if your background is really pale, try pushing it a little bit deeper. Even just creating gradient, or if you're going to do, some kind of environment, that's up to you, but you can kind of play with pushing those values down, and it really helps enhance the portrait. You're very, very welcome. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions. All right. Stella, are you in here? Yeah, I figured it was glare happening, but you might consider oiling even if you don't plan to repaint your background. I would, when you get ready to paint the edges of the hair, at least oil out your background a little bit so that you can see if it's even or not, or if you want to retouch it. Remember, you can always wipe off the excess oil using like a latex sponge that you use for makeup, like those little triangle ones. Those work great for removing excess oil, and they don't leave any residue behind on your painting, no lint or anything like that. Stella, are you in here? If you're not, then I think we had kind of talked in email about me sending you another layover. But if you're not in here, you said you would rewatch last week's. Alrighty. Well, if you have any issues, Stella, just reach out to me, and I'll try and send you another edit when you've brought your painting a little further. Okay, Marianne, are you here? I thought I saw you in here earlier. So if you're in here, just let me know how this is looking. If the color or the saturation looks too intense. I think I already might have desaturated it just a touch. How's the brightness on that? Is that looking pretty good? So I'm primarily going to work with the close-up today. Though you did send me, I think you sent me another, was that last week's? I might still have the old one. Okay. Oh, there you are. No, I can see your answers. Too bright, too yellow. Okay, good to know. There is a slight delay between me talking and you responding. That's just because of the streaming speed. There's like a little bit of a lag. So if you hear me pause, I'm just waiting for an answer. Okay, so a little yellow and a little bright. So let's try bringing maybe the highlights down, and then maybe the color, take out some of the yellow. Is that better? Yes, this is your this week's. This old one here was from last week. Actually, no, I think it might be the same. You sent me 2 images, didn't you? Hold on, let me check my email really quick. Just to make sure I'm doing it on the right one. Yes, I have the updated one. Hold on, I'm looking again. Just want to make sure. Okay, yes, so this is this week's right here. Yeah, this was sent to me on Thursday. So this is the one right here. Okay, good. Yeah, they're very similar. So let me just, for good measure, delete the old one so we don't get confused. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so you're still working on a couple of the glazing and the scumbling. Your transitions are looking really nice. I like the purple color that you have in here. Let me get my pen. Right in here, that's really nice. Your transitions in the nose are looking good. So what I'm kind of doing right now is just taking a survey of the whole painting and looking for, edges that stand out. And this is what I do with my work. Oh, okay. So you worked a little bit on Friday too. So what I look for are, edges. That's usually what I end up refining the most towards the end is, edges, transitions, color enhancement, and that sort of thing. Yours is a little bit warmer than this. Let me change that just a touch then. Let's try that. I realize there's going to be a slight distinction between monitors and that sort of thing too. Okay, so what I'm seeing is that maybe we could work on a few edges, and I'll just point out a couple. This edge right here, the shadow edge is kind of getting a little bit lost. So we might want to go in and reestablish that connecting tone between, let me do this in black here, between this area and this area up here. And there's a little bit of an abrupt edge transitioning right here. So those are two areas we'll talk a little bit about it. More pink, less yellow. And let me try. How about that? Your colors are looking pretty good, even if there's a slight distinction between our monitors. What I'm looking more at here is value transition, edge quality, and that sort of thing. I think we could work on building up more midtones around this corner of the mouth and maybe a little bit in this transition there. And let's just start with those areas, actually. So let's talk a little bit about that here. So in the cheek here, you have a nice shadow color here. And it looks like you used a green to help you transition out of it, which is working really nicely, but we want to make sure you still have a sense of that core shadow edge that we can see so clearly in the photo here. So don't be afraid to kind of continue pushing that, maybe even a little darker, because then that green is going to kind of lock into place. But leading out of that green, you probably are going to want to find a color between this one and this one to help soften that transition a little bit. And maybe even taking a little bit more of a, let me try a different color here. I feel like that color's too yellow. We're going to cool it off a little bit. And that could just be the photo coming through. So if it doesn't look yellow in person, don't worry about that too. Yes. Well, okay, so the green is usually, it's usually like deep gray or deep green shade. It always hugs the light side of the core shadow. After that, you shouldn't have any green on this side of that core shadow. So think that Terminator line as like a barrier. Okay, so the green usually hints on the other side of the face. And sometimes it's more gray. Like on her, I would say it's a little more gray in this photo. It takes on a little bit of the color of her shirt. You can kind of see, so it has less yellow in it. And again, that could just be a photo thing. Maybe it looks more gray in yours. On someone with more olive skin, it's definitely going to be more green. And then it usually transitions into the next step of mid-tone, but that's usually like a more neutral version of, you know, the pink part of the skin. It really depends on where you're kind of transitioning. So just think on the shadow side of the Terminator line, that's usually reflected light, what we call reflected light, but it's not really a light. It's still considered part of the shadow mask. And that should always be warm and transparent, or a transparent feeling, meaning it has no opaque white in it. On the left side, in this case, the left side, or on the light side of the Terminator line, you should have more of a cool transition. So basically you're going from a warm, let me label this here. So you have warm, cool, warm. And then as we get to the lights, it gets more into the cools. So you have this pattern from warm to cool to warm to cool. And that's just like a general kind of guide. Of course, we're going to have warm zones of the face. We're going to have cool zones of the face right here as well. But we're still kind of following that warm, cool, moving towards the light. Now, if our light source was warm, just hypothetically, if we had a yellowish light on our model, it would be warm, cool, warm, cool. Does that make sense? So it usually follows something of a pattern like that. And again, these are kind of relative things. It depends on what kind of environment the model's in. So oftentimes these half shades, as the form starts to round back, they're picking up whatever environment the model is in. So if the model had a red background, you know, if she had a really bright red background, then you would start to see that red influence these planes as they wrap back. Okay, so these are, when we talked about skin tones, that's why it's not just about finding a formula, but rather thinking about the light logic and understanding, you know, if your model has more olive or warm skin tone, then even though she might have cool in this situation, it would still be cool, you know, warm, cool, warm. But her main body mass, light mass, might be warm in between, and also the transition tones, even though they're cool, they might take on more of a yellow if she was olive tone. So it might be a warm green, whereas our model here has a cool green. Does that make sense? I know it can be very confusing because warm and cool is a very relative thing. You can take two grays, let's just say Let's take a gray here, right? You would consider that a pretty cool gray if we compared it to the skin tones, right? It looks really, really gray. You would even consider it cool next to that shadow. But then we can take another gray and put it next to it. Now which one's cooler? Right, they're both gray, or a type of gray, but color is relative to what's next to it. So that's just the principle, the key principle to take away from here, is that a lot of times when we're talking about warm and cool, it's relative to the color next to it. So just keep that in mind. This is relatively cool here compared to here. It is also relatively cool here compared to here. So that's what that means. Okay. All right, so let's get back to painting here. Yeah, I think you have some really nice transitions. I would just work on this one right in here. And don't be afraid to look at where there's like a little bit of the tone kind of pulling in here, just a touch. And even cooler and a little bit more tone right on the edge of this lip. Right in here. You can see it actually goes quite a bit darker. And it helps the edge of that lip kind of roll out. So maybe cool that off just a little bit. As that corner rolls into, or that form rolls into that corner. It's very soft where it transitions out, but that's going to add some more depth to the lip there. And it does the same thing here. It's just slightly warmer because there's a reflected light happening. This would be a little bit more of a shadow, technically, where the hollow of the corner of the lip is, where it's the darkest. But then it transitions into a cool kind of gray halftone. And just adding even just a touch of that, a little bit darker. And then she has actually, from this angle, a little bit more of a smile line. I'd keep the edge soft here and maybe connect it a little bit with this tone, or fade it out to this tone that you have over here. But that helps give a little bit more depth to that corner. Yeah, I think what was happening before with that upper corner on this side here was that it was just blending into the lip color because it was too warm. So I'd push it a little cooler. Let's see, what else? You might consider just, I think this part of the lip might have gotten a little big. And just make sure that it has a kind of a softness to it as it rounds back. It's okay to kind of lose that edge there. You might introduce some cooler pinks to the light side of the lip, because right now they all feel kind of uniform, so maybe going in with more of an alizarin pink, and then going in for your kind of highlights on the lip. And looking at where you kind of lose some of the edge towards the corner. Yeah, it's a tricky area to soften the edges of the lips. Now, one thing that I use as a trick, you saw me do it in the other one, is to find a color that's in between. Like here where we have a real high contrast. And I just tile a slightly lighter pink above between the highlight above the rim and the darker color underneath, and it creates kind of a natural softness to that lip. And you don't even usually have to blend it that much because it kind of serves as that blended edge for you. So try maybe using that technique and see if you have better luck with that. I do feel like the green kind of color in here is a little saturated for the whites of the eyes. There will be a slight amount of that, but I think you could go maybe a little bit more neutral with it. Maybe try something that has a little bit of, try adding maybe a little bit more of a neutral gray. You could try adding a little burnt sienna, maybe just a very small amount. You don't want it red, obviously, but just a touch into that green color. And you can see that gives a little bit more natural look to the cast shadows. The whites of the eyes will always reflect, white objects just reflect naturally whatever colors are around it. So, you know, you have a lot of purple kind of around the eyes here. It's going to pick some of that up. And again, remember, the whites of the eyes are going to follow the same rule. So your whites of the eyes should have cool lights, which they do, and slightly warmer shadows. Slightly warmer than what you have in the lights. And here in the lights you have this kind of bluish gray. That's fine. So you just want this to be a slightly warmer version of that color. And obviously slightly darker. Does that make sense? So that would be my suggestion, is to work on some of those areas. With regards to your question about like the highlights being slightly different from this angle, the main thing you want to look for is maybe sharpness to the highlights. So like in here, you have a little bit more, I think you can punch up the pink on that highlight there and give a slightly sharper edge. It definitely softens through here. You might want to try and give a little more of a soft mid-tone across the keystone shape. Just push it a little bit darker, especially as it rounds towards this shadow. I think it's feeling a little wide there, but if you add more of this mid-tone transition, maybe push your shadow color in a little bit more, it's going to kind of narrow that feeling across the bridge of the keystone shape. And you'll notice she has some of those same kind of grays and green, kind of grayish green colors in here. So I think you could carry just a touch more, right just at the top. You don't want to go real bright, but just at the top, right before the brow. Yeah, I think you might have, well, that's what you're going to, what will narrow it is the nose at the top. Maybe a little bit in here. If you take a mid-tone color, instead of having the highlight so wide, narrow that part with a mid-tone. You have some nice colors in here, but maybe you could pull them in just a little bit right across this part before the nose kind of opens up in the bridge. So just maybe try pulling that in slightly as well. Yeah, if we make our highlights too broad on the nose, it actually makes the nose feel broad. So look at, the highlights are very specific. There's a very tiny kind of speck here, and it kind of dances down the middle. Make it a little brighter here. So it's a little bit bright here, and then it kind of trails off to a point, and then you have that nice bright highlight on the tip of the nose. The rest of them are actually more just slightly darker light colors. So that's going to help narrow the bridge too. Since you have these nice lavenders in here, you might consider introducing a few just before her eye turns into the dark here. So she has a shadow here underneath, which you already have established. But you notice that like right here, it's more of a gray purple. Part of that's her eyeshadow. But I think if you took that a little cooler there as well, I think it would add some more life to the color in her eyes. Is the fill from area too green, gray in yours? Should it be warmer? You mean like this little dark shape? I would say it has maybe too much yellow. Maybe try going in with more of a skin tone that has a little blue in it. That maybe has a little, it almost feels like a soft violet, like what you have up here in the eye area. And it shouldn't have too much contrast, just a little bit. I wouldn't say warmer though, I would actually say cooler. What will help this area kind of feel a little bit warmer is to break it up. You have it really, really light. Maybe take a slightly more pinky tone and make it just slightly darker right here. That way the highlight rim is the brightest point across here. Let me grab a highlight color. And then the light kind of hits right here and fades off, and then it gets slightly darker, just a little bit through this middle section. That will just add more dimension to the overall feeling in that area. I do feel like her chin might have dropped a little bit here, so take maybe some of this gray tone, or your greenish gray mid-tone. Try bringing that up a little bit. Let me look at her jaw shape, because she does have kind of that squareness to her chin here. Maybe the shadow shape can nudge up just a little bit through here to shorten the chin. And of course, if you do that, then you do have to bring up your gray tone to retransition that area. Slight difference, but it does help lock in her likeness a little bit more. And don't be afraid to carry some of that gray around the corners of the chin as well, as those forms pull back. There's a little bit of light here, but you can see it's starting to get a little more cool and a little darker as it rounds the ball of the chin. No, it's okay. I was actually pretty much done with the eyes. Other than a few maybe dark accents, when you go in and do, you know, your final touches, you might find after darkening the mouth that you want to darken, you know, maybe the little accents in the tear ducts. I would say look at maybe how you could soften some areas, like towards the inner corner where the eyelashes are. Maybe make them less sharp. She has them there though. They're pretty intense. I would just make them maybe a softer gray instead of a brown towards the inner corner. That I tend to do that with the lower lashes anyway. Instead of using just straight brown, I'll use like a slightly opaque version of that color. I'll add a little white or something, because it tends to make the lower lashes feel a little more delicate. All right, do you have any other questions? So I'll send you this here. Moving forward, just continue to develop the hair. You know, look at some of your edges. I would develop a little bit more here in the neck, getting this form to round. You know, don't be afraid to add that little dip in your shadow here and start to round out some of these forms with a little bit more mid-tone. Just generally I would push the neck a little bit darker. It's not nearly as bright as the face. It's a bit cooler. The only area that starts to approach the value of the face is right here. And you'll see when I do the edges of the hair how you can go in and soften the forms of the hair where they meet the background. It looks like your background's nice and dark, so you can just leave it like that if you want, but you might have to oil out the background in order to kind of modify some of the edges of the hair. Green versus gray in the skin. It's somewhat due to the complementary color of the skin tone, but not exactly. A lot of the gray-green actually occurs on the face where we have, it's because we have hair, like a very, very subtle peach fuzz on the face, and anywhere we have that, it's going to catch the light and create that gray-green. You'll notice it more strongly in men who have that stubble. But women have it as well. So that's part of the reason. The other has to do with the nature of, the skin is built up of layers, so light passes through those layers. We have veins and capillaries and all of that. So all of that kind of plays a role in, the colors of the skin. But if you have a model with, a more yellow, darker skin, some of those colors are going to just get more neutral. Usually on really fair skin, you tend to see those blues maybe a little more strongly, but they do exist in all variations of skin. It's just they're sometimes more subtle. It really just depends on the person's inherent, like kind of natural average skin tone. In the case where our model, she has some warmth to her skin, but I wouldn't say she has very, very, very warm skin. In general, if we put her next to a model that had very, very olive skin, we would say, oh, she's definitely cool. Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, and part of it is the transitioning to the shadow. If you learn to look for it, you'll start to see it. And look at some Dutch painting, because they really tend to emphasize that, but you can see the select placement that they chose for that. And a lot of it has to do with that warm, cool pattern that I mentioned earlier. Because if your shadows are warm, your lights are overall cool, but you also have transitions in between those planes. So we have our cool up here, we have our warm down here, and then we have cool. Sometimes it warms up again. It's not exactly a formula, but it's more something you just want to be aware of, so that way you know what to look for when you're analyzing and you're trying to understand what colors you're seeing. Skin tone isn't just one color. It's not like you can buy the tube of flesh tone that that you sometimes see at the art store. It just says flesh color, and that you can just use it on to paint anyone. That doesn't make any sense. Skin tone varies greatly. You can put the same person under two different lighting situations, and it will bring out different colors in their skin. The cool also has to do with the environment. So like I said, if you had your model in a red environment, let's take red as an opposite, like even a deep red. If she had a really deep red behind her, let me just do this on a new layer here, just for illustrating the concept here. Let's say the model was in a really red room. Well, we would see that red in her shadow really strongly. Then we would definitely see some cooling, but then any transitions kind of leading out of that would pick up more red, more red. Does that make sense? So it depends on what colors we have around the model. Because we have these kind of gray purples and greens, this turquoise in her shirt, that's influencing these halftones. as they turn. Yeah, so look at some of the master paintings and you'll notice that as well. Especially the Dutch painters, kind of in the golden age of Dutch painting, they really did that a lot, very strong. But just look at any painting really, and you'll start to see that where they accentuated it. Thank you, Brenda. All right, everyone, let me see. I think that was the last one. So a little bit short critique today. Does anyone have any final questions? Yes, halftones are considered part of the light. So anything towards the light from that core shadow or the terminator line is considered light mass. Anything towards the shadow side from that terminator line is considered shadow, even though we call it reflected light. I wish there was a better term for it because it's not really light in a sense. We still consider it part of the shadow mass. It's just because there's light reflecting and illuminating a little bit of those planes, but it's still considered shadow. Okay, guys, thank you for tuning in. I've been talking all day, so I got a little tongue-tied. I will send out your edits right now so you guys can get to work, and I hope you enjoy the final lesson. I can't believe it's the end of the class already. Seems like it flew by. And I know thank you guys for all hanging in here because I know it's been an intensive course and there's a lot of content. So you guys will have extended lifetime access to the videos. So you'll have access through the end of July, so July 30th, through the website. Before then, I will send everyone a link to my Gumroad account where you can sign up for access to the class indefinitely. So you'll always have access to those videos. And I'm going to keep everyone in the forum so that as you continue to work on your paintings, even beyond our critique, if you continue to work, then you'll be able to reach out to me for written feedback, or I can answer any questions you have. Oh, hi, Marianne. Yes, it was a really strange turn of events. Yes, but I did get some of my equipment back. It was damaged, but luckily still functioning. But it was a random kind of incident this person was involved in with the police, and it was I don't know if those of you who knew about my studio break-in, but they had dropped a piece of paper with their name on it, and it was a very common name, so they didn't think it would lead to anything. But anyhow, long story short, the name was connected to this other incident, and somehow they've been I'm still waiting for some stuff back because I'm not sure, and I don't know if I'll get it back, but he took more than I realized. Some of my other filming equipment, I just only recently realized it was missing, and some of that stuff. So anyhow, it's been quite a week, but I'm really thankful to get, my main camera back. So anyhow, thank you to those of you who ordered prints. I should be sending those out sometime next week. Okay, everyone, thank you. And if you guys have any other questions, just let me know, and you can post it in the forum. And just for next week's critique, make sure you send me a close-up and a backed-out view of your painting. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, and any final questions you have for the course. All right, thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. All right, thank you. Take care, guys.